All right. Hello, folks. My name is Todd Crowell. I'm the director of the Institute of Environment at Florida International University. But today, I'm actually here as the past president of the American Association of Ecosystem Research Centers and as a board member of the American Institute of Biological Sciences. So this is a webinar which we are incredibly grateful to our program officers at NSF who are willing to share their insights on some current and future funding opportunities. And so we've invited the folks part of AERC and AIBS. And Yatsuna, can I have you introduce yourself as the AIBS lead?
Thanks, Todd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Jyotsna Pandey, and I serve as the Director of Public Policy for the American Institute of Biological Sciences, which is a nonprofit scientific organization, which is sort of like a society of scientific societies and organizations that represent the full spectrum of the life sciences. I want to thank AERC and Todd Crowell for inviting AIBS to partner on this event, which we are glad to be involved in. I'd also like to thank our NSF panelists for taking the time to join us today. And before we sort of get into the presentations, and as long as I have the floor, I just want to mention a couple quick logistical items. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording link will be shared with all registrants in a follow-up email after the webinar. If you are experiencing any technical issues, please use the chat function on Zoom to reach out to AIBS IT support directly. And this is basically my colleague, Diane Bozenjak, who serves as AIBS membership manager. And so feel free to reach out to Diane over chat if you're having any issues. We'll have a Q&A session after each of the presentations and also at the end if we have time. So please go ahead and use the Q&A feature on Zoom to type in your questions, and Todd and I will keep an eye on those as they come in. And with that, I will hand it back to Todd to introduce our panelists. Oh, Todd, you're muted.
We've sent around the batting order a number of times, and I think we're going to be more or less able to keep with that. So as Yatsuna said, each program officer is going to spend about 10 minutes talking about the various programs that they run. And then we'll use 5 minutes after each speaker for questions. Not everybody can stay for the whole time. So again, we'll watch the Q&A feature and then we'll come back and ask the panelists. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Matt Kane. Matt is a longtime program officer at NSF and ecosystems and a lot of things before that. But Matt, we're going to start with you for the big overview of ecosystems and some of the new exciting things like the environmental data center. So unmute yourself and Yatsuna pull up his slides.
I have given an update or two, so is it okay if I share my slides?
Sure, Yatsuna, can you give him? Yep.
Yeah.
Will that work?
Yep.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Okay, hang on here just a second. Let's go to. Okay, can you guys see the slides?
No, not yet, Matt.
Okay, hang on. And
Got it.
Yes.
You're on.
All right, let me change here to the view. All right, that should look better, right?
Yes, that looks fine.
Okay, great. So this is just an analysis of the language that we find in proposals coming into the ecosystem science cluster. It's a core program area in the Division of Environmental Biology and has been for a long time. And essentially it funds projects, that are on the fundamental science of understanding the structure and function of ecosystems, be it terrestrial, freshwater, streams, lakes, coastal, but not marine other than coastal. So open ocean is covered in another part of NSF. As you can see, some of the kinds of topics that surface, are soil processes, hydrology, freshwater aquatic things, and terrestrial tree and grassland studies. These days, there's a fair amount of microbial research, especially in soils and in salt marsh and estuarine sediments. It really covers a lot of ground. So that's the core program area in ecosystem science. Let's see. Another program I'm involved with, a program that's been around for 11 years now, is the, there we go. The the Macrosystem Biology and Neon-Enabled Science Program, or MSB-NES. The basic goal of this program, Macrosystem Biology, is to understand biological phenomena at regional to continental scales. And that's why in this analysis of language from proposals in MSB-NES, you see continental scales and spatial scales taking a fundamental role in those projects. Certainly remote sensing, as with ecosystem science, in macrosystem biology, remote sensing is big. The program, I would say, encourages use of NEON sites, data, and infrastructure. And that infrastructure for NEON includes everything, well, Liz will explain it more, but it includes everything from, their airborne observatory platforms to towers, to biodiversity samples and soil samples and water samples and the like. So this is the Macrosystem Biology program. It really covers a lot of ground. It has overlap really with all of the areas of DEB science, population community ecology and evolutionary processes and systematic and biodiversity science, and beyond, into ecohydrology and the geosciences and climatological processes. We do a lot of co-review both in MSB and in the ecosystem science cluster. Last but not least, I want to tell you about a new initiative. So with the National Ecological Observatory Network, or NEON, being completed several years ago in 2019, it really opened up the amount of open environmental data available to scientists. NEON produces something on the order of 180 different data products, all of which are available free of charge and to anyone who knows how to access them, manipulate them, and use them. But not surprisingly, being a relatively new piece of infrastructure and being very complex and exciting, there's a little bit of a learning curve. And so the same applies to a number of the other sources of open environmental data that are available, whether it's from the Ocean Observatory Initiative in the NSF Ocean Sciences divisions, or the Critical Zone Observatory Network, or LTER, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. or even, you know, sources such as iDigBio, GBIF, or the satellite systems that are maintained by NASA. So all of these are producing a huge deluge of open environmental data that is really crying out to be used to address some of the most pressing questions that are facing both science and society. And to help scientists do that, we have created a new synthesis center. The name of the center is the Environmental Data Science Innovation and Inclusion Lab. Director is Jennifer Balch at the University of Colorado at Boulder. And the center has several unique features. First and foremost, of course, is it is a synthesis center, and it will support incubation working groups, science incubator groups in different areas to advance the use of open environmental data to address questions in environmental science. But it also has three other aspects that are equally important. First of all is the emphasis on team science. You know, with all this data from sources like NEON being freely available, it means that anyone, anywhere, at any institution can access it, and it has the power to better democratize environmental science, to include you know, all kinds of diverse scientific backgrounds, institutions, etc. And so building diverse teams and having a culture of inclusivity is one of the fundamental pillars of the center. Another one is advancing cyber infrastructure and data analytical tools for environmental science. The center is both a gateway to train people how to access these. It provides a foundation, a structure, a computational structure for doing that, a software structure for doing that. But it also is a source of creativity for new data analytics and tools for analyzing environmental data. And then finally, you know, education, training, and outreach are a huge component of the center. And so training the current and next generation of scientists in how to access, manipulate, and use all this open environmental data is going to be, you know, another fundamental pillar of the new synthesis center that we funded. So you should all, you know, I enthusiastically encourage you to Google ESIIL, ESIIL, and look at what they have to offer, and to keep your eye on what they develop. And with that, I think I can stop sharing. There we go.
Great. Thank you, Matt. We don't have any questions right now. Hopefully you can stay on for a little bit. So let's kick it over to Liz, and then as questions come, maybe they'll be directed to both of you. So Liz.
Okay, thank you for starting those slides. So I'm going to talk about two things with you today. Matt talked to you about Macrosystems, which we call a special program within DEB, and Ecosystems we call a core program. But we also fund a number of programs that cut across multiple directorates. And so one of the longest running, over 20 years now, convergent science program we've had at NSF started out as coupled human natural systems. And this is a program that's shared between the Bio, Geo, and Social Sciences Directorate. And it's really focused on understanding how humans and the environment are intertwined, interact, and function as a system itself. We know that there's nowhere on Earth any longer that is not affected by humans. And so this is really to help develop fundamental understanding of these interactions and hopefully develop the predictive capabilities to predict how those interactions might change over time. So this program is called the Dynamics of Integrated Socio-Environmental Systems, and it's really focused on developing new concepts and scientific understanding of the complex interactions within and among environmental and human components of a system. And what we mean by a system is any unit of study that a group proposes, whether it's a wetland, a forest, a mega city, agricultural system in the Midwest, or a series of urban to rural gradients in the entire Mississippi River. It's really up to the PIs to define what that system is. But in that definition, it's important that they quantify the critical human and environmental aspects and also provide an understanding of the context in which that system is located, as well as its external connections, not just its internal feedbacks as well. So let's go to the next slide. I thought I'd give you some examples of what we funded this year to let you know that this program covers any type of system. We funded things from, and it's not required that you collect your own empirical data. It's okay to use historic data, ice cores, archaeological data, global climate models. Any number of tools or information can be critical to these projects. So this past year, we funded projects that went from studying the relationship of bees and bee health in greening of urban areas as people develop urban gardens, urban green spaces, green roofs, and to see what those dynamics are and the diversity of bees that are there. We also funded a project that looks at these both social, environmental, and technological challenges as you go from an urban center out to a rural environment, looking at multiple places along the Mississippi. Also trying to understand things in human-dominated systems like agricultural systems in the Midwest. Now, in terms of the human component of these projects, it can be everything from studying a group of people to actually involving the individuals in the study itself. In this past year, we funded 2 projects that involve indigenous populations, and both of those populations were part of the formulation of the project themselves. We call that co-production of the research, and will benefit from the results itself in trying to understand sort of indigenous management of a keystone species, and also forest management in the tropics with people who've been managing over millennia of climate change to see what practices that they've developed that might help in going forward. All right, could I have the next slide? So Matt mentioned to you in his talk about ESIIL and also Macrosystems, the National Ecological Observatory Network. Now, this is a project that took 15 years from conceptualization to finalization of construction in 2019. And the purpose of this observatory is to deploy research infrastructure in a very precise way across the United States, both in terms of instrumented towers, standardized sampling of biological organisms and processes, so that you can scale from that individual site to the region and to the continent. And so the United States was broken up into 20 eco-climatic domains to allow that to happen. But to get from local to continental, part of the infrastructure also includes airborne remote sensing, a high precision LiDAR, hyperspectral sensor, and high precision camera. that can see anywhere from a sub-meter to several hundred kilometers. So that allows you to go from the in situ measurements to remote sensing and allow you then to scale even broader using satellites. As Matt mentioned, all the data that are collected from the sensors or the biological materials or biological sampling are made available at no cost through the internet. He mentioned the standardized data products that are available. And so NEON has all this data highly standardized and available for use, and it's intended to function for 30 years. Could I have the next slide? All right, and so in terms of for ecological research, NEON is revolutionary. It's revolutionary not only in its design, but state of the art infrastructure and the fact that it's all networked together and goes back to a central headquarters. In addition to the infrastructure and sampling, there are also biological materials. There's a bioarchive associated with NEON in which you can get access to those. They have something called Assignable Assets, and this is where through research projects, you can request deployment of the Airborne Observatory to different locations. There is a standardized tower on a flatbed that you can rent and put at your research site. Or if at the NEON sites themselves, there's an interest in collecting something NEON doesn't collect, you can actually hire the NEON staff that are highly experienced to do those kinds of collections for you. It's been already highly productive in the time that it's been operational. There are almost 500 publications that cite and use NEON data. It has a big presence at annual meetings like ESA and AGU. This past year, there were 25 deployments of these assignable assets. And so it's becoming a resource that's increasingly used by the research community and is critical in terms of providing the data that ESIIL scientists will use. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions you might have.
Great, thank you so much. So I have a question, Liz, since you're on the mic, I'll ask you, and then Matt, there's one for you to queue up. So Liz, one thing people are wondering is, do you know how long the DICES program is likely to last? In other words, is it a 5-year program, a 3-year program? Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, so we have a memorandum of understanding among the 3 directorates, and we usually do those for 5 years at a time. We're starting the 4th year of our current 5-year MOU, and the intention is to up it again for another 5 years. So at least 2 more years, and I'd say a real good likelihood another 5. It's a program that's really well liked by the directorates themselves because of the constant new science that's being developed from it.
Yep, very cool. And Matt, this is kind of a similar question. Do we expect ESIIL to operate kind of like NC since the sync? I mean, is this a 10 to 15 year vision for this synthesis center? So
NC's is somewhat unique in going beyond 10 years. At this point, ESIIL is funded for the next 5 years. It's likely that it will come up for renewal for another 5-year period, although, we want to wait and see what the community needs are at that time and how far along things are, but that's the plan currently now. So the lifespan is likely to be about 10 years for the center.
Great. Okay, thank you guys so much. Doug, you want to give us some insights into other DEB programs?
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, we don't
see
you yet. Oh, there you are. Hey, Doug.
All right. So I'd like to talk to you about population and community ecology and about the LTER program. And I only have a single slide here, so I don't think this will take very long. But PCE is, like ecosystems, one of the core programs in the Division of Environmental Biology. And what that means is that it's not going anywhere. It might change its name slightly over time, but it is part of the DEB course solicitation. So pretty much anything you have in mind that fits the list of topics I have there will always be welcome in population and community ecology. In brief, we fund anything from the population level, so population dynamics, demography, and then moving up a bit, species interactions, food webs, how species interact, compete with each other or predation. And then at the community level, what determines what species occur together in which places? So community assembly. We also look at communities back in time. We go back as far as the Holocene in general, so roughly 10,000 years. And then we're interested in landscape ecology, behavioral ecology, and as Matt also mentioned, macroecology. This brings up the fact that we do, like Ecosystems does, a lot of co-review of proposals with other programs. I think it's fair to say Ecosystems is the one that we co-review with the most, but as far as we're concerned, and I'm sure Ecosystems shares this view, the more interdisciplinary, integrative sorts of proposals, the better as far as we're concerned. So all those topics there are fair game. I do want to mention that there are two topics that we tend not to fund. Marine ecology, and you heard Matt mention that Ecosystems also shares that. So we're primarily terrestrial and freshwater. And then we don't fund ecotoxicology either. I want to say a few words about both of those because I make it sound as though it's more black and white than it really is. So the marine ecology division is based more on logistical support constraints than on scientific topics. And what I mean by that is that if many marine ecologists require ship time, ships are expensive, and the biological oceanography program in GEO is set up to provide that sort of infrastructure, whereas we are not. So if you consider yourself a marine ecologist, the rule of thumb, or basically rule of knee, you'll see is what it turns out to be, is as follows. If you wade out into the ocean knee deep and you look toward the shore, and most of your questions, most of the processes you're looking at take place in front of you, that is toward the shore, then you're PCE. But if you turn around and look toward the open ocean and most of the action takes place out there, then you're very likely biological oceanography. This is admittedly a very fuzzy sort of boundary, and it's very common for us to get questions about whether a particular proposal should be submitted to PCE or to BioOcean. Don't be timid about reaching out to folks like me to help you with that decision, but don't overthink it either. It really doesn't matter where you submit it. We promise to find the best home for it. With respect to ecotoxicology, again, this is not black and white. We don't want to step on the toes of EPA, and so we will not fund studies that are straight up ecotox. So for example, the classic ecotoxicology study is trying to establish LD50 curves. Don't do that. But we have a long history of, for example, funding studies on ecological effects of road salt. So is salt an ecotoxin? I don't think it's worth arguing. If you are interested in figuring out effects of road salt on population dynamics or community structure, in other words, the sorts of questions and processes that PCE would normally fund, then we would certainly be interested in seeing that sort of proposal. Likewise, we have just started to fund proposals on microplastics in the environment. So if you're interested in how, for example, microplastics might influence food webs, then we would be interested in a proposal like that. So again, feel free to contact any program officer in PCE if you have doubts about how the fit of your particular program, the fit of your particular project for PCE. And that, by the way, holds for any NSF program. Feel free to reach out to program officers at any time. We're good about responding. Okay, I also want to tell you about LTER, Long-Term and Ecological Research Program. Unlike PCE, this is a quote-unquote special program like DICES. It is unusual how, and most special programs come and go. It's just the time span over which they come and go. A typical special program will be around for roughly 5 years. LTER is one of the longest running, if not the longest running special program at NSF. It's been around for roughly 40 years. And it focuses on site-based ecological research that's question-driven. And I've got in parentheses, unlike NEON there, because as you heard from Matt and Liz, NEON is not question-driven. It's focused on providing open ecological data that anybody can access and use to answer their own questions. LTER has, each site has its own particular conceptual framework that integrates data collection on what we call five core areas. Those areas are primary production, population dynamics, organic matter accumulation, inorganic inputs and outputs, and patterns of disturbance. So all LTER sites are united in the sense that they focus on those five core areas, but they integrate those five core areas in different ways depending upon what their particular questions are. Currently, there are 28 LTER sites and then a network office that coordinates activities of those sites. And there are many opportunities to get involved in research at an established LTER site. One of the most common questions we get is, I have a great site and would like to make it into an LTER site. How do I go about doing that? And the answer to that is be patient. Because we put so much money into the existing LTER sites and we've made a long-term commitment to them, there is rarely any new money available for establishment of a new LTER site. So pretty much the most common way that new LTER opportunities become available is when a current site is no longer funded, when it fails for one reason or another. So that's very unpredictable, but keep your eyes on the LTER site and the DEB brief blog. And there will be, I hate to say it, but it's very likely there will be opportunities for new LTER sites in the future, but we'll keep it vague.
Thank you so much, Doug. Let's see, let me work backwards. Are there any updates on LTREBs? You talked about LTER. Can you say just a couple words about LTREB?
Sure. So LTREB and LTER are very different things. The only thing that unites them is long-term research. LTREBs require 6 years of continuous data collection, what we call core data. And they are also question-based. They have a unique funding structure in that they have what's called a decadal plan. The proposal that is submitted for an LTREB is a 5-year proposal with a 10-year plan, okay? So we fund for 5 years, which is pretty much the maximum we can fund. And toward the end of that 5-year period, the PI submits a renewal proposal that if things have been going according to plan, if the PI has not gone too far off track, then another 5 years will be, another 5 years of support will be provided. That renewal proposal is reviewed. It just doesn't go through a panel review like the initial 5-year submission. And that LTREB program covers all different core programs of Division of Environmental Biology. So in other words, you can submit an LTREB proposal on ecosystem research, on population community ecology research, on evolutionary biology research, and on systematics research, although we very rarely see it on systematics.
Great. You mentioned microplastics, and Matt, you might want to weigh in on this as well. There are lots of new emerging chemicals, right? Pharmaceuticals, PFAS are the whole big thing that EPA and DOD are jumping all over. Can we assume that if we are asking research questions about these emerging chemicals and how they impact predator-prey dynamics, ecosystem function, those are still fair game and wouldn't really be put in that ecotoxicology box?
Yes, as far as population and community ecology is concerned, if the focus is more on the ecological processes than on the toxicology, than on the physiology, say, of those compounds, then we're open for it.
Great. And Matt, same for ecosystems?
So what I would say is, first, if you have a project that's going to involve, plastics in the environment or other contaminants, send us a one-page description of the project so that we can give it a read and see how well it fits within our course solicitation in ecosystem science or PCE or any other area. We're always happy to look at up to one page and give you feedback. There is a challenge in sort of integrating what can be more applied science into our core program in ecosystem science. So to the extent that research involving things like plastics or heavy metals, for example, still involves asking fundamental questions about ecosystem structure and function, then I wouldn't anticipate any problems. At the same time, this isn't a bioremediation program. It's not, an environmental pollution program. And so, the best suggestion I would make is send us a one-page description and we can give you feedback on whether or not it's a good fit for the program.
And I see.
And
Doug,
I strongly agree with that. There's a lot of space to go off the field of PCE or ecosystem sciences without realizing it. So let us provide input, please.
Yeah, that's really great advice. As you guys know, this webinar is really aimed at early career scientists. So that kind of advice is exactly what they need to hear.
And
so
I think Liz wanted to say something too.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there is another program too. It's not in bio, it's in engineering, called Chemical Bioengineering, Environmental and Transport Systems, we call CBET. And they oftentimes fund research in these areas that may have a biological or ecological bent to it, but would be more focused on sort of the degradation of the plastics or the chemicals, but might have this dimension. And we do co-fund with them on some of these projects as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Doug. Thank you guys for that great discussion. Let's move over to Peter. And what's DBI look like these days?
Okay, so let's just jump right to the next slide. So the Division of Biological Infrastructure has three sort of major clusters, and there's a lot of programs under these headings. And I've tried to focus on the ones that I think might be the most relevant for this group, and of course the ones that I'm personally involved with. But the basic divisions are, we have a set of programs that provide research resources, another set of programs that support human resources, and then a third cluster that focuses on large facilities and continued operational support for major facilities. So let's jump into a couple programs that I've selected to talk about for this group. There's a full list of programs on the DBI website. Let's go on to the next slide. And if you have any questions about any of those other programs, I'll try to answer them. But the first one I wanted to mention, I think, is very important for this community. This is Research Coordination Networks. It's not a uniquely bio program. It started out in bio, but it's cross-cutting around the foundation. And this is a program that supports people getting together, large communities getting together to solve problems that aren't likely to be solved by one individual team, but really require community efforts. So most of the funding really goes toward supporting travel time and people getting together to talk about various kinds of activities. There's an education track for this, but the main program is focusing on just getting researchers together to talk about new ideas, new directions, and perhaps build synthesis in areas where their individual research awards don't let them take the time to do that. Let's go on to the next one. I think I've got one more program in the human resources I just want to mention. This is a very important program for a lot of people. This is Research Experiences for Undergraduates, and Sally O'Connor would be the contact for this. Again, it's a cross-cutting program that DBI represents bio in, but this is a really essential resource for training the next generation of scientists. And an awful lot of our core research awards are often partnered with or have REU awards that they're somehow connected with to help with their broader impacts of their various infrastructure activities. Right, so the next slide focuses on one of our programs in the research resources. We recently restructured all of our programming to sort of divide things up into three main pots. This first pot are activities that are really about doing research for tomorrow's infrastructure. We have a number of sub areas within this: bioinformatics, instrumentation, and sort of generic research methods. But the focus in all of these is on novel approaches that haven't been tried before in biology. The products usually are just papers saying, you know, we tried some new algorithms to try to solve something in phylogenetics that no one's done before, and this is the result. It's not necessary that we're going to get finished products out of this, but it's an essential program to really keep breaking new ground in terms of moving infrastructure forward, to reserve a portion of our portfolio to fund true research into bioinformatics, true research into developing new instruments. So if you've got a new idea of some statistical approaches or some algorithms for solving a problem with digital data, if you've got some ideas of developing some new imaging technology or some new sensor technology that isn't quite ready for prime time, but needs a little bit more research to really prove that it really can do something that current methods and instruments don't do, then these would be programs for you. The research methods is a fairly new one. We don't get a lot of traffic here, but it's basically targeting ideas that are so far ahead of the curve that you can't really pigeonhole them as either software or hardware yet. They're just ideas that somebody wants to explore that could turn into something. And so that program exists there for sort of those really rare kinds of things. As with all of our core programs, this is a no deadline activity. Let's go on to the next one, which is the sort of next stage up. The cycle here is kind of a graduated stage of maturity of cyber infrastructure. So this next set of programs is really about delivering mature infrastructure, robust tools that actually can work and can serve a broad community. So within this area, we've got a number of sub-programs again, one being cyber infrastructure. So unlike the bioinformatics program, which is about novel new methods, this is really about delivering databases, delivering software, delivering new metadata standards, delivering new knowledge bases, delivering new modeling platforms, tools that people can actually use. They can download and install, or they can log into a website and use, or they can incorporate as middleware as part of another piece of software that they're doing. The collections and field stations are basically capital improvements to support ongoing availability of both biological research collections and field stations and marine labs, which of course are essential for people to have access to habitats and locations where they can carry out field work. And so that's probably something that's very relevant to this community. Vis-a-vis the discussion we just had about the marine versus terrestrial distinction, this program is actually jointly operated between bio and geo, because we do have support for marine labs and terrestrial field stations as part of this. So we sort of sidestep that fuzziness by just basically having participation from both directorates, and Candy and I just kind of work out the co-funding or divide up which ones we think are most relevant for the communities that our various directorates support. So again, these are all no deadline programs. I'll mention very quickly, I don't have a slide for it, but our cyber infrastructure program has a sort of a sister program that's operated in the Office of Advanced Cyber Infrastructure called Cyber Infrastructure for Sustained Scientific Innovation. CSSI is the acronym. It's very similar to our cyber infrastructure program in that it's about building robust tools with nice user interfaces and scalable tools that can be used by a large community. The difference is that the CSSI program is cross-cutting. So sometimes there are cyber infrastructure tools that can serve more than just biological researchers, and those can fare very well in this program, and it helps us split the cost with other divisions when we find something that really fits that bill. Myself, you contact me for the cyber infrastructure and field stations questions. Contact Reed Beeman for any questions about collections. Let's go on to the next one. You'll notice in this previous slide, I didn't have instrumentation listed there. That's because our instrumentation support at this scale is really handled through another cross-cutting program called Major Research Instrumentation. In some cases, it's similar to the kinds of things that we support in field stations. I'll provide funding in field stations for things like sequencers and mass spec and gas chromatographs and whatnot, renovating labs, or even just mundane things like housing facilities and other kinds of things needed for people to actually be able to be in the field. The MRI program is also primarily an acquisition program. There's some support for instrument development in this program. It's got a little bit more of a budget than I have in field stations. The field stations is uniquely targeting facilities that are at remote off-campus field stations, whereas MRI is mostly for stuff that's going to be on main campuses. There's a number of constraints here in terms of number of submissions from institution, and depending on the size of the award or the nature of your institution, there may be some cost-sharing requirements. Rob Fleischman is your contact in DBI if you want to know more about the MRI. And then one more slide, I think, for me, and then I can open up for questions. So this is the third cluster in the division. This is the Centers and Facilities Research Infrastructure cluster. Matt and Liz both talked about the new Synthesis Center and NEON, both of which are technically housed in this cluster, but there's a number of other activities that may be relevant for this community, particularly the Science and Technology Centers competition. That's a cross-cutting activity with the Office of Integrative Activities. And we currently have one active center that Rob Fleischman manages on X-ray free electron lasers. There's a regular competition every year, and it's possible that we may get proposals that might be relevant to environmental research through that activity. We have a new activity, a relatively new activity called Mid-Scale Research Infrastructure, which has two scales. This is a program that was created basically to try to bridge the gap between MRI and the Major Facilities Construction Program. So these are activities that are MRSRI is up to 20 million, and I think MRSRI 2 is up to 100 million or something. I'm not sure what the actual upper limits are, but these are pretty major infrastructure that are funded as cooperative agreements, and there's a regular competition each year for these. Again, Rob Fleischman would be a good person to contact for that. The last one I want to mention is the Sustaining Infrastructure. This is an activity that we started years ago within the Cyber Infrastructure Program, and that basically is intended to provide support for ongoing maintenance and operations of infrastructure that we consider to be critical for sustained biological research. Obviously, we have limited resources we can put into this. We can't sustain everything that everybody would like to see sustained, but through a process of evaluating what is considered most critical for important areas of NSF funded research, some resources can get at least enough funding to make sure that they don't go dark. Some of the activities you may know that are funded by this, the Protein Data Bank is one, Environmental Data Initiative is another one, and the Cyverse activity is also supported currently under this activity. So that's just a quick run through of the major infrastructure programs that we support. There's a lot of human resource activities that we have, a number of new ones, too long to list here, but if anybody wants to find out about those, they're all listed on our homepage for DBI. And I think that's my last slide. Oh, just a link to the blogs.
Thank you so much, Peter. I work in Ecuador. Is it possible to apply for SML funds in Ecuador in collaboration with USA researchers?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. We do support facilities that are outside the US territory. The award, of course, has to go to an eligible US institution. But a lot of field stations are on foreign soil, are either wholly owned or are operated in collaboration with some US university or some 501c3 that allows us to make an award. As long as the money's not going, being transferred to another foreign institution, if it's being received by a US institution and they're spending it on that facility, then the only thing we really need to see is, A, do you have the authority to make improvements to that property? And B, do you have something to assure us that if we invest in this property, it's going to continue to be available for US scientists and students for a reasonable period of time for the life of whatever improvement you're asking for.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, that looks like all the questions for Peter. So let's move on to SBE. Bob.
Hi. I don't see any slide. Oh, here we go. Okay, campers. SBE has around 24 different programs that support ecological related research. So I could bore you by going through all 24 of them, although even doing that in 10 minutes would be hard. But instead, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more generally how you can find out more, what you need to know. And of my 5 slides, one of them actually gives some suggestions about what differentiates proposals that are funded from those that are not funded. SBE is Social Behavioral and Economic Sciences. It's a directorate. We have different ways of getting money from us. The unsolicited competitions means that the competitions, the programs, don't have a written solicitation. Or if they do, it doesn't change from year to year. So my program, which is Decision Risk and Management Sciences, doesn't have a solicitation. It has a web page that can say, look, this is the type of stuff we fund, and if you want to find out more, here's how to do it, but that's it. In my view, the genius of NSF with these standing programs is that Washington bureaucrats, or now bureaucrats spread around the nations, I'm speaking to you from Connecticut, we don't say what we're looking for. So I get asked all the time, what is DLMS looking for in our next competition? And the answer is, you tell me why your research is going to, why it has significant intellectual merit and strong broader impacts. In other words, why are we going to learn? What's the new knowledge? And why is that new knowledge important for society? So if you say, hey, are we looking to fund more on vaccine hesitancy or climate change mitigation support or a new agent-based modeling approach to something, the answer is you make a case that what you want to do is likely to produce new knowledge that will be important. I will mention 3 programs specifically. My program got a good deal of money a few years ago from the Exxon Valdez accident. Some of you may remember, and in fact, the captain died last week. But anyway, because of that, we have an affinity to fund environmental related research. So keep that in mind. HEGS is a program, the name of which is Human Environment and Geographical Sciences. It used to be geography, now it has that human environment in there. So they also have an affinity. Now, if you go to the SBE website, you will not find political science. Does this mean that we do not fund political science? No, it does not. What happened is a few years ago, the House of Representatives voted to defund political science entirely. The Senate did not go along, but as you might imagine, a lot of folks are not willing to throw themselves on their sword to fight for funding political science. So what we did is we changed the name. So now there's a program called AIB. And when Todd asked me to speak for AIB, I said, great. Why does he want me to speak about accountable institutions and behavior? That's the name of the program, Accountable Institutions and Behavior, where you may not be supportive of political science. Do you really want to vote against accountable institutions and behavior? The other former political science program is labeled Security and Preparedness. That funds comparative politics, international relations, etc. Again, you may not like political science, but do you really want to be against security and preparedness? Okay, so my point about this is that if you want to understand something about economic incentives for environmental protection in certain contexts, and that's going to make a contribution to basic knowledge in economics, yeah, the economics program is your home and probably my program too. In SBE, we do a huge amount of co-reviewing. That means that more than one program will review your proposal, and that makes it easier to fund. Since we have set budgets, if I can get econ, which is more money than my program, to fund half of it, you are more likely to be funded. So, and the next slide talks a little bit about how to get more information. Special solicit, could you go back to the last slide? I have a little bit more to say, I promise. I realize if you divide 5 into 10 into 5, you get 2 minutes each, but this one is really the longer one. Okay, special solicitations we've spoken about. DICES is one. Rapid response research. If there's research where you need to get in the field now because you've got to collect the data, for example, flood relief efforts where you can't wait. My program and most of them in SBE, we have deadlines. But by the time you send it in, it would be reviewed, your data has disappeared. If you have ephemeral data, we will fund that research. 1 year, up to $200,000. It's got to be good science. We won't just fund, well, we want to gather some data. Now, what's the theoretical advance, that type of stuff. Okay, in SBE, eagers are rare. The origin of eagers was research that's so weird, it cannot get a fair review in the panel, so it needs to be taken out of that approach. My program has funded one of these in 21 years. So, you know, don't even try it unless what you want to do is so laughable that it really can't get a fair review in a panel. So you need to use this mechanism. Career grants. Your junior faculty, careers are great if you're in the engineering directorate because they fund lots of them. Different directorates have different approaches to this. The computer science directorate funds lots of them. SBE does not. My program generally funds 1 or 1.5 a year. So unless you're one of the top people in your field, don't even try it. You're much better off sending us a regular standard proposal. 2 more things. DDRIGs, doctoral dissertation research improvement grants. A number of SBE programs fund them. Mine does, and I love them. We don't get a lot of them. It socializes your students to the National Science Foundation and the approval process. The PI is the dissertation advisor, not the student, and it's expected to be up to standards. And we will fund anything except a stipend. So participation money, travel money, etc. Finally, research coordination networks. The bio people talked about that earlier. Essentially, an ongoing set of workshops over a number of years to develop a field. Okay, finally, Todd, next slide, please. Okay, where to start to find out about a program and what it's really doing? Go to NSF's website and look up awards, and you can find out awards that have been funded in the last 30 or 40 years, including the current ones. So you get a sense of what are they really funding. Proposals are private, awards are public. You'll find a one-page abstract, who got the money to do what over what period of time. Now, if you have a solicitation like COPE or DICES, yeah, read it and read it more than once, because when it says in there that you must do so-and-so, must means must. Read it carefully. Okay, finally, what happens frequently, people think, gee, I wonder if that fits the RMS in social psych or econ, or can I co with engineering, civil engineering, wherever. Well, what I would ask you to do, if you think it might fit my program, send me a one-pager saying, what do you want to do? Then the likely theoretical or methodological advance. This is the National Science Foundation. If you just want to futz around and see what, no, that's not going to fly. What's the likely theoretical or methodological advance? And what's the literature or literatures on which you are building? So send me a one-pager. I like it in writing rather than talk, because first, I'm not good on my feet. And number two, it gives me a chance to read it more than once, and I can share it with colleagues and say, look, it may not be me, but maybe Higgs. So I'll talk with those guys. Next. I'm not watching the type. Okay, myths quickly about, this is just general stuff. We only fund scholars at elite grad. Nah, that's not true. I'll give you an anecdote from my program from a couple of years ago. There was a proposal from a well-known engineering school in Cambridge that I won't mention. And my panel they were just going after it. It was like, well, why isn't there a comma in that sentence on the third page? That it's really, and they were really being vicious. And one of the members said, if this were coming from a non-R1 institution, would we be recommending it? And they said, of course, this is solid research. So yeah, there's a halo effect, but there's also a kind of non-halo effect. So, if anything, program officers I know get more of a delight funding folks not at a R1 if it's really good, solid research. So next, do we fund? Nah. For famous academic is probably an oxymoron. Once declined, you are likely always to be declined. Nah, we have no loser list. I can tell you, because she said this and said I could, there's a well-known social psychologist, was chair at Rutgers, now is at Carnegie Mellon, Gretchen Chapman. She was 0 for 12 once in her life. Now she's no longer 0 for 12. She gets a lot of money, both in dissertations for her students and in larger grants. Only funds normal science. Nah, if anything, you don't want to hear the word incremental used about your proposal. Something that's going to, I was told once by a division director, Bob, you've got to fund more research that fails miserably. What he meant, take some chances, riskier stuff that, they may not be able to pull it off, but boy, if they do, it could really be transformational. So, okay, and panels make funding decisions, so you need to just worry about the panel. Now, this is not NIH. Panels make recommendations to program officers. There's a very high correlation between what the panel thinks is wrong and what is funded, but the correlation is not 1.0. A couple of the most successful proposals I've funded are ones where the panel said, decline it, it probably won't work, it's too risky, and we funded it. So anyway, next. If you would, Todd. Okay, this is the reasons. The trust me proposal is common. It's you are especially likely to have this problem if you won a Nobel Prize or are very distinguished, because you'll spend a lot of pages talking about how great you are and not a lot about what you're going to actually do for the research. You're going to say, hey, we need more research on this topic. I'm really good, so give me the money and I'll figure out exactly what I'm going to do. That's the trust me proposal. You're likely to get a review saying, gee, this is a really good idea and you're distinguished, but fundamental details of exactly what you're going to do are missing. So we're not going to fund it. Not feasible, expertise gaps. You'd be surprised with social science. One of the banes of NSF is people think that social science is easy to do, and they're right. Surveys, for example, are very easy to do, where, you know, structural engineering is hard to do badly because it's hard to do it at all. My point is that, yeah, you can do a bad survey very easily that will not give you valid or reliable information. So if you're going to do a survey, somebody on your team should have that expertise, or reviews are going to say, you know, you have a gap there. If you're doing econometrics, get somebody who can do econometrics, not an engineer or an ecologist. So team. Insufficient funding. You're not asking for enough money to do the work. You say you're going to do this national survey involving so-and-so and so-and-so, and you want $5,000. Yeah, well, that shows me that you don't know what you're doing. Too ambitious. You, over the period of time, if you look at the work plan and the money you're asking for, it's just, you know, you're not being realistic. So those are fairly common reasons. Another reason is it's pretty narrowly incremental, or it's just blah. You know, you don't get excited. I would tell you the truth, which is that the standing programs in my directorate, with a couple of exceptions, have not had an increase in their budgets since 2011. Now that's a decade. So one of the reasons, you know, we're getting tougher to get, we're funding less research than we would like. And I have a number of proposals that are really should have been funded that weren't funded because we just simply don't have enough money. And there's also bad luck sometimes. You have a good solid proposal, it's interesting, great idea, but you know, somebody else came up with something very similar and they're even sharper. And we're not going to fund two proposals on something that's very close. So, okay, Todd, next, please.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up, Bob, to get on with everybody else.
This is quick. Learn to love rejection. Try it again. Team up. Get the expertise you need. If you have a question about your proposal, send it in and encourage your students to do DDRIGs.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. You had the word COPE in one of your slides. Stand by. Rita's going to talk about COPE, but I suspect there are some questions to be fielded there. But thank you so much, Bob. Okay, let's move to the ends of the earth. Olivia, you want to talk about polar programs?
Sure. You can get to the second slide. So polar programs. Basically, we do fund basic research and education about polar regions, but also the relevance of polar regions to the globe and in order to advance welfare of people in society. So next slide. So there's two main sections in the polar program: an Arctic research opportunities. We accept proposals anytime. There is a fieldwork component that has very important time period that you need to be prepared to submit your proposals at least 18 months prior to your deployment. And that's because there's very complicated logistics with doing research in Antarctica. Here are some of the main key types of project that the Antarctic Research Opportunities Fund. And you can read that in the slides, but I wanted to go through some of the examples of research that Antarctic programs fund. So next slide, please. My colleague put together a few great slides with pictures showing just the range of different types of ecosystem components that Antarctic programs fund. Here focusing on food webs in the Ross Sea. Next slide, please. Research on microalgae. So again, at the very bottom of the food web. Moving up to the next slide, please. Krill, again, an important part of the food web in Antarctica, and now also importance because of the increasing interest in krill fisheries. Next slide, please. Penguins, one of the key predators over there in Antarctica. There's been a lot of long-term research in this region on penguin ecology. Next slide, please. And also seals, research on seals also involving quite a bit of telemetry data. Next slide, please. And then things like invertebrates that you don't see very often for those of us not lucky enough to be able to go and deploy down in the South Pole. Next slide, please. And again, thinking in mind of the relevance to society, studies on cancer compounds that can be obtained from Antarctic sea squids. Next slide, please. So moving on here to the Arctic section, I think my colleagues have already described the types of proposals like research networking activities, just your general research proposals. We also fund conferences and large project support. The map shows that we do fund in the Arctic section quite a lot of projects, including both the marine and terrestrial side. Next slide, please. We also accept proposals anytime. I put a link there to the Battelle Arctic Logistics Support Program. They can actually help you with planning just a rough estimate of costs for some of the logistics to do Arctic research. For those of you who are potentially interested in submitting to the Arctic research opportunities, what be most relevant probably are the Arctic Natural Sciences and Arctic System Science programs. You might be confused about what the difference is between the two. As my colleagues mentioned, it's often easier if you contact a program officer and send that one pager. But just in general, Arctic Natural Sciences is more focused on studying processes in the Arctic and is mostly hypothesis driven. And Arctic System Sciences is looking at systems that cut across spatial and temporal scales and things such as carbon cycle, water cycle, and so forth. Next slide, please. Here are the other programs in the Arctic section, Arctic Social Sciences. We have a long-term Arctic Observing Network program that I'm a program officer for. There's Polar Cyber Infrastructure and an Arctic Research Coordination and Policy Support Program that helps to enhance communication, coordination, and collaboration involved with Arctic research. Next slide, please. I also wanted to highlight that we have a postdoctoral research fellowship. The new solicitation is going to come out soon. We anticipate the new deadline being in February of 2023. There are specific eligibility requirements. You need to be within 24 months of having PhD level employment. So not 24 months since getting your PhD, related to PhD level employment. And if you have any questions, I have contact information listed on this slide. And next slide, please. And that's really quick for polar programs. I have information there for myself and in general for polar programs to contact us here. Thanks, Todd.
Thank you, Olivia, very much. So there's geographic overlap. We have LTER sites in Antarctica. We have them in Arctic. We have NEON sites in the Arctic. And so it might be confusing if you want to do a project and you want to use an existing, leverage a NEON site or an LTR site. Does it still go through your program? Do you contact the other program officers as well?
I think, yeah, it is very confusing. I think it is helpful if you think there is a very strong polar component to it to contact a polar program PO first. And as my colleagues mentioned, there is a lot of behind the scenes collaboration with my fellow colleagues in other divisions and directorates and potential to co-fund. So as much as possible, if you can provide information in a one-pager that we can share with our colleagues, we're happy to help make those connections on your behalf.
Okay, that one-pager keeps coming up.
Yeah.
Reach out and get some advice. All right, very good. Thank you so much, Olivia. It's really nice to meet you. Oh, Barbara, innovation.
Okay, looks good. All right, I'm going to talk to you now about something a little bit different, and this is taking your ideas to impact. Okay, NSF has a whole new emphasis in some areas of the foundation, and this is really to take your results of your research and move those to society and the economy. And there's quite a lot of money that's being invested in that area, and there's no reason why people that work in ecosystems or ecology should not benefit from this. So what I want to talk to you about today is a couple of these kinds of opportunities and sort of what you need to be thinking about in order to snag some of that cash, okay? So the first thing you might say is, let's go to the next slide. What's in it for me? Okay, so let's take a look at what the benefits would be for you if you were to, let's say, become an eco-entrepreneur. Have a startup based on something that you've discovered in what you're doing, or maybe you find a way that you could, let's say, rehab some wetlands that might prevent coastal flooding, or you find some kind of a special way that you can reforest, let's say, you know, a bunch of burned areas that from all the wildfires that are going on. These are all big ecosystem questions. And there's a lot of fundamental science that goes along with this, but there's also opportunity for you to maybe become a co-founder of a company, or become the technical advisor of a company that your postdoc or your graduate student founds. So the thing is that what these innovation activities do is they provide more NSF money for you to actually put more legs on your funding stool, because you should never depend on one program or one source of funding in your career, because if that funding goes away or something happens in that program, maybe your contact leaves and there's somebody else there who is not grooving on whatever it is you do, okay? So you got to have other options that you can fall back on to continue to keep your empire, no matter how tiny it is or how big it is, going. So what this innovation space also does is it allows you to increase the visibility of your work and its impact. And this is truly critical for you if you're an early career person and you need to make a name for yourself. So you can get tenure, or you can be promoted, or any other things that you may desire to have in your career where people look to you as the expert. It can also turn on industry support, believe it or not. And I'm going to show you some examples in just a minute. You get recognition from your organization too, because you know what? If you have some patents, believe it or not, people in ecosystems and ecology can't have patents, you know, I mean, it's not like limited to people in engineering. And it can increase your student enrollment, because students say like, hey, you know, I'm having even more of an impact, not just doing something that's ivory tower in a relationship, but something that actually makes an impact to society or the economy. And it also provides more employment for your students. Now, generally speaking, people in ecology have a pretty good outlook in terms of employment, but you never know where people want to go. And providing them the skills and the opportunity and the experience in how to become, let's say, an eco-entrepreneur is huge. Next slide, please. And in fact, I'm going to show you a couple of examples here of eco-entrepreneurs and eco-innovation that have happened. Okay, if you look here on the left, there's a guy there, and he's like a scuba diving guy. And this is a new eco-entrepreneurial enterprise called Sea Trees. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to reestablish kelp forests along the west coast of the United States, because they've been really decimated by echinoderms. And so what they're trying to do is find a way that they can increase the extent of all kinds of biological systems that help to retain the ecosystems that, you know, promote fisheries and just marine life in general. And that's actually a very cool thing. You should Google that. The video that they have for that is totally inspiring. Same thing for Acción Andina. This is also an eco entrepreneurial effort where they're planning to reforest 1 million acres in the Andes using indigenous people, both to give them ways that they can make additional money and also to reforest a lot of the landscape there so it retains more water. That also has a really fantastic video. You can just type in Acción Andina and eco-entrepreneur and it'll pull it up and you'd be like totally amazed. There are other things like One Tree Planted, where they're trying to reestablish ecosystems of mangroves in areas that have, been undergoing subsidence and that really need to have more of a barrier between wave action and erosion in coastal areas and wetlands. And similarly, they want to plant 1 million mangroves in various locations that they've found need to have this kind of protection. And once again, it employs the local people, and it's fun. These are funded by nonprofits, but they're also for-profit organizations. For example, I was saying about the wildfires that we were seeing. Once you burn all those trees down, I mean, what are you going to do? It takes a long time for them to reseed. So what's gone on is now there are a couple of companies that have been started up. One is called Drone Seed, and the other one's called Flash Forest. Both of these are relatively new startups. They are planting, hundreds of thousands of trees using drones and the seeds of various kinds of trees that have a nutrient packet attached to them. And the drones actually shoot them down from the air into the ground at a certain spacing to reforest areas that have been completely burned by these wildfires. And actually these companies are kicking butt right now. And there's a lot of investment out there in the venture capital world for these kinds of ecosystem restoration startups and entrepreneurial activities. Now, you don't have to look outside of NSF to get some of this money to get this stuff going if you have some kind of an idea. So next slide, please. What I want to do is I want to say, look, NSF is here, ready to get you into the innovation space, okay? We have new programs that are focused on innovation, co-design, convergence, use-inspired and translational research. And a lot of this comes out of the new directorate we have for our technology, innovation, and partnerships, which I'm hoping Thiago will be here. He is a division director for one of those sections who can explain some things about what's going on there. And these actually are initiatives that speed the delivery of your ecological ecosystem research results to society and the economy. And there's up to like $1.5 million worth of equity capital from Uncle Sam in some of these programs. So it's something really to be thinking about as you're planning your next research projects that you want to do. Next slide, please. But you know what? A lot of times people don't really understand what some of these words mean. What does convergence mean? It's where you have multiple diverse disciplines and communities that are impacted by some issue that have a problem that needs to be solved, or where the problem needs to be solved, even though the communities don't have an issue, but maybe the ecological system does. It's where you also have industry involved and decision makers. So basically you have all these stakeholders working together. And you wonder, well, why is that important? I mean, I like to sit in my little cave and do my little thing on my little plot of land here. But the problem is you can't really tackle large, complex problems without all these other stakeholders involved, at least not so that you can make a difference and have an impact that will stick. So what it is, it's to have these efforts that are coming out of NSF are focused on this multi-stakeholder approach, but they're giving you a full court press to have rapid results. So within 1 year or 2 years, you have to have some really major deliverables that make a change for people's lives or create some whole new kind of an industry. Next slide, please. So another word that they have is co-design or co-production of knowledge. Okay, that's where, as a scientist, you have to be able to work with residents who live in a place where you're going to be doing your work, or where you want to solve a problem, or where you have a possibility to make a real impact on their lives, okay? You have to not only be the best expert in the room, you also have to be the best listener in the room. And that listening part is really hard for scientists. We like to just like drop in there like colonial kind of science. We come in there, we tell you what to do. You guys do it. Maybe they do it, maybe they don't. And even if they do it, maybe it doesn't stick. So what co-design is where you work with people to actually come up with a workable plan that the community will actually embrace and get involved in, and then sustain over the long-term. Citizen science is part of this. And these are great for anybody who's in ecology or ecosystem science, because you know what, sometimes you just don't have enough students and bodies on the ground there. But you know, you can train high school students, you can train people who've got backyards who want to maybe count birds or like look at bud bursts or whatever it might be for you to do your research. And so this is actually something that's really coming to the fore in a lot of new programs that are coming out of NSF now. So think about getting some training in what co-design is. Start working with some social scientists, as Bob O'Connor was talking about. I mean, a lot of times when we have, you know, colloquia or symposiums inside our departments every week, you know, we're just talking to ourselves about our stuff. You need to be starting to invite some of these other people to those colloquia so they can tell you, you know, how does game theory work? I mean, I always thought, well, you know, the social scientists, who knows? It's like, how do you tell what a soul is? Okay. But I mean, they have a lot of very quantitative methods that they use that many people in the other sciences don't actually know about or know the power of. And so start inviting some of these other kinds of stakeholders and disciplines that you're going to need to know these people to build competitive proposals in some of these large new programs that are going to be coming out of NSF. So let's take a look at one of these. Next slide, please. This would be something called the Convergence Accelerator. Now there's a Dear Colleague letter that will probably come out about the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year. It's really ambitious. It's a cohort-based attack on a complex issue, and basically about $40 million is channeled to whatever the topic is that is selected. There are two phases. If the topic is something that has to do with ecosystems, you guys can certainly participate in there. There's two phases. The first phase is $750 for 9 months. All right, this is like a workshop on steroids. You come in your proposal with, here are all my stakeholders that I'm going to be talking to. Here's kind of like what we plan to do if we get the nod to move beyond phase 1 and go to phase 2. These are the massive, like high impact deliverables we're going to create, and that will be used at the end of those 2 years. And in those 2 years, you're going to get like $5 million in 2 years to deliver. Okay. Got to have like a lot of different stakeholders involved. And it's really accelerated high impact advances. And given the changes that are happening with global change, with what's happening in the environment, these are really crucial. And I just tell you, okay, I come from the geosciences, and you know what? Extractive industries are going to just explode in terms of how many there are going to be that are new. And extractive industries, let's say for mining, terribly environmentally disruptive for the ecosystems and where they're situated, and for the populations that live near there. And so there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people that do the kinds of things that you do, especially in this early part of your career, where you can really have a huge impact. Okay, so think about submitting something like that as one of the ideas, or some other idea that you might have that really will help people and move us towards the solution of a big complex problem. So next slide, please. Now there are two other things that you should be thinking about beyond just sort of working with a lot of other people. Okay, one of these is use-inspired research. Now there's a lot of confusion about what that means. A lot of people say like, oh, you're talking about applied research. You know, NSF doesn't do that. So I can't, you know, they would never do that. They would never touch this with a 10-foot pole. That is totally incorrect, because use-inspired research is not applied research. It is still research that you can publish in the peer-reviewed literature. It's just that when you pick a topic, there's a reason why you pick that topic, because it has an impact to like solve a problem that is plaguing people or society, or maybe some industry or some, you know, part of the economy. Okay, that's all still fundamental research. It's just there's a real reason for doing it. And, you know, sometimes they talk about this as the Pasteur quadrant, you know, where there's the Thomas Edison quadrant, which is basically kind of applied, you know, I try a billion things and see what works. And the Pasteur quadrant is sort of, you know what, there's a problem out there and I'm going to just start working on how I can solve that problem, which in his case was some diseases. Okay. So the thing is that it's really trying to understand critical science and engineering issues with value to society fundamentally. So let's go to the next slide. And so what is translational research? I mean, people always talk about that and you go like, whoa, what the heck? You know, isn't this applied too? No, it is not applied. But it's closer to applied than use-inspired research is. And what this is this actually moves that use-inspired research and starts moving it towards the commercial sector. And you might say like, well, I don't want to dirty my hands with anything commercial, but you know what? That's the wrong attitude to have, because you know what? That's what makes science discoveries a reality. That's where they actually have application, and you don't have to do that application. Other people can do that application for you. You can partner with people where you can be the technical expert and they can be the people that like make the business happen and be, you know, and you can be a co-founder, but you don't actually have to dirty your hands with like all the accounting and like trying to get the investment. Those other people do that. Just like use-inspired research, translational research is also publishable in the peer-reviewed literature. Okay, it's really looking at a product, a technique, a process, mechanisms, something that have application to something that, you know, somebody in industry might be interested about. I have a couple of little examples there, at least in the geosciences. So let's go to the next slide. NSF actually has a number of programs here, and I'm not going to go into these because I'm thinking maybe Thiago will actually address some of this. But there are 6 opportunities that are coming out of the new Technology, Innovation, and Partnership, we call it TIP, Directorate, and also ones that occur outside of that. For example, there's the Intern program. This will supply your graduate student who's working on your NSF award with $55,000 and up to 6 months to work with a non-academic partner on doing an internship related to their thesis and whatever it is you're funding on your NSF award, because we don't want the student to have an extension on their time to graduation. It already takes a long time for them to graduate. So it needs to be something that whoever the host would be amenable and see value in your student working for them, so the student actually gets some real life work experience that they can put on their resume so that they can get hired later on. And also it helps them appreciate what use-inspired and translational research actually can mean and can do for them. Goalie, that's for you. That's for faculty members. So that's for you to actually go and work with somebody in industry that might have an issue. You could be working with a mining company to do some kind of like restoration of some kind of ecosystem on, I don't know, coal mining land or something like that. There are all kinds of possibilities here for you.
Barbara, I'm getting some info. Thiago is here and he'd like to go. So if you could get through.
Yeah, okay. And then
if there's time, we'll come back. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, and Thiago's going to talk about the rest of these. So I'll turn it back to you, Todd.
Great. Thank you so much, Barbara. And stay on because, you know, there might be some time. Sure. Thank you for joining us, Thiago. One thing I want to do is I want to remind the folks, if you have questions, you need to be typing them in the Q&A box, not the chat box. I don't see the chats that are going between all of you. So if you're putting questions in the chats, I'll never see them. So you've got to go to the Q&A function and put your questions there.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
I don't see anything in the chat.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Barbara. And Thiago, thank you so much. I know it must be busy times creating a whole new directorate, but thank you for your time. And we're all anxious to hear what you guys are up to.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And I'm in some sense pleased to probably go towards the end. And Barbara did a fantastic job defining translational research and use-inspired research. So it reduces my work. Thank you. Can you go to the next slide? So again, I'm Thiago Nandagopal. I am the Division Director of the newly created Innovation and Technology Ecosystems Division within the TIP Directorate that was announced in March. Now, many of you who are familiar with NSF may be wondering, well, what does this mean for NSF and what does it mean to the academic enterprise at large? And I would like to just give a little bit of a preview as to why we are doing what we are doing, in the sense that what our programmatic portfolio makes sense to you, right? So we see ourselves at NSF and the nation at a defining moment where we have what I call a perfect trifecta of issues that converge right now on us. One is the fact that we are no longer the sole scientific leaders in the world, right? So we, for almost like 60 years after the after the World War II period ended, we really dominated the scientific enterprise. We were the mecca for everyone who wanted to come here to do the leading science. So we attracted top talent, and we got the investments to match, and we had the benefit of great breakthroughs in science and technology that led us to really be the leaders. That is changing now, right? Many companies, many countries are equally investing, and institutions across the world are upping their game in investing in R&D and retaining their talent. So that's a big challenge. The second piece that we have is we are also, again, once we are no longer the top destination for scientific talent, we are now forced to reckon with, well, we do need scientists and technologists in many of these fields. And we know that they are going to be the basis of the development of a robust economy. And we also are at the same time, facing with severe underrepresentation issues within the country. There are many pockets of the country we have completely ignored for various historical and structural reasons that we need to really address. And third, we are facing socioeconomic challenges like climate change, crumbling infrastructure, lack of equity, and a rapidly aging society, and declining, access to mineral resources and so forth, that are going to threaten our way of life and the quality of life that we all have been used to. So this is a defining moment, and just as Vannevar Bush called for action, saying that the United States needs to lead by investing in R&D, we feel that this is exactly the reason why once again we have to raise our game and up our investments in scientific R&D with an intentional focus towards meeting these challenges. Next slide. And we see this as a perfectly built use case for what the National Science Foundation should do. People talk about emerging technologies. We say, oh yeah, we have to invest in advanced manufacturing, wireless, AI, quantum, whatnot, right? And there's also this talk about all these great problems. We believe that emerging technologies can be brought to bear in a meaningful, productive way in pursuit of solutions that are viable, low cost, and rapidly achievable, right? So that society can benefit in a very short term. Previously, science was seen as a long haul thing, right? Oh yeah, you do the science, maybe 10 years, 20 years later, you reap the benefits. That won't cut anymore. We have to somehow see these benefits in a rapidly changing society. Luckily, the whole pace of investment and R&D and translation has been accelerating very quickly. And also because public has very little patience. We live in a world where attention spans are decreasing and people really want to see action happen fast. Next slide. We believe that we can do this, right? And what we want to do, in some sense, is to change what so far has been a push-based, investigator-driven approach to science R&D, where the discoveries just come when they happen to happen by circumstance, And then, you just work on whatever makes you happy as an investigator and then you move on, right? There's no real pressure beyond the publishing model sometimes to even, make them relevant, socially relevant. We want to change that and say, how do we drag the problems that matter into our thinking process? How do we engage the different stakeholders, like ranging from industry, government, communities of practice, the average Joe who's on the street? How do we incorporate their perspectives and how they view potential solutions or use them or benefit from them? How do we incorporate those perspectives to drive research problems and translate them in a way that that problem is actually solved? We can't stop at the first paper that publisher that gets you acclaim, but we need to actually figure out what makes that solution actually work in practice. Get rid of those assumptions that sometimes plague us, right? So we want to make it, so we want to have a coexistence of what we call as curiosity-driven research and what Barbara very beautifully described as translational research or use-inspired research, right? We want to have both of them coexist, and we're hoping that increasing number of scientists and academics would go, to pursue this translational research model. Next slide. And in some sense, I'm going to skip this slide because, this is the pasture quadrant. We want to live in the pasture quadrant. We really want to take the research that NSF funds in the pure basic quadrant for all these years. Now, there are many directorates do this, and we know what industry loves. They love the pure applied research model, and we want to live in this happy medium where we can essentially bridge these two by bringing in societal use cases and bring them to the benefit of society. Next slide. And that's basically what TIP wants to do. Sorry, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Yeah. So we are a unique directorate within NSF. As many of you may know, there are different directorates, math, physical sciences, bio, computer science, and so on. They support communities of interest that live, within the scientific disciplines. TIP does not have its own scientific discipline. It does not have its own specific community. What we are, and this is a message that I want you all to take, is we exist to support all of NSF research communities. We are a horizontal directorate. We are going to work with everyone to inspire and enhance and accelerate use-inspired and translational research. That's our goal, right? So this is a message take on, right? We are not trying to take away what use-inspired research, what research investments are being made already in existing directorates. We're not going to force you to change your behavior. We hope that we can encourage you to see the light and the value where you can actually feel proud about the impact, social impact, and the benefits you are having, you and your students are going to have as part of the work that you do, and say proudly that you contributed to the solution of a pressing societal problem or a national problem, and you had a hand in the United States leadership in a certain segment. So that's our goal and desire. Next slide. So there is a range of programs that we are going to be building on. And again, as I mentioned, we are a horizontal. We span all of NSF. We are going to support all of NSF. And I'm going to talk about how we are going to do this. And the foundation of what TIP is going to do is to build partnerships. Partnerships within NSF, as I mentioned earlier. We are also going to be focusing extensively on partnerships across the United States, across various sectors. Right? A great example is the next slide that we started out with Intel, which came out with a $20 billion announcement into build to chip factories. But as part of that, they essentially recognized NSF's role as going to be a vital one to develop the semiconductor workforce for its next generation. So this is something they have announced $100 million of investment over 10 years to work with NSF to develop the semiconductor workforce. And Intel is not alone. We are talking to other companies in the semiconductor space, right? And this is a great example of how we can take a small catalyst and use that to build and expand our efforts, right? And you will be watching more announcements in this space to come. But semiconductors is one example. We want to build similar partnerships on quantum, on AI, on the bioeconomy, and so on. So we don't want to stop, right? Every emerging technology area, we really want to catalyze these partnerships. And again, when we build these partnerships, it's not just TIP with Intel, right? It's NSF with Intel. So Intel will work with engineering, the materials resources, material sciences division, with the computer science directorate, and so on. TIP will be the facilitator, the catalyst that will facilitate these conversations to happen. Next slide. And on top of it, we are going to be promoting a lot of work on building regional and innovation ecosystems that really demonstrate how to accelerate and go about the process of what you call as convergent research or translational research and use-inspired research. So a great, we are bringing in a program that already Barbara talked about that used to, the NSF started 3 years ago, the Convergence Accelerator, into this program. We are also going to be working heavily on building ecosystems around the country on emerging technology areas, on the workforce development pieces, like bringing in experiential learning and teaching entrepreneurs how they can effectively learn about translating technology and developing a businesses out of it and creating impact. We are also going to be talking about how to build regional impact, how to do these things at scale in an entire region, and that's for transforming the region. So let me go to the next slide. So the Convergence Accelerator, as Barbara had talked about earlier, has many tracks, and we always are looking out for new tracks. As I mentioned, please be on the lookout in December and January for an RFI that initiates a call for future topics. And there will also be workshops that will be happening now that we will going to be announcing soon. Many of them are relevant to the community here. So you'll be pleased to see at least 2 sets of workshops that are going to be coming up in November and December. So please stay tuned for updates on this. Please sign up for the Convergence Accelerator mailing list. That's one surefire way. We are also I encourage you to sign up to the TIP mailing list. You can access it by looking up the link on the right sidebar on the TIP webpage to sign up for updates, where you can know which workshops are coming up next and the RFIs and funding opportunities. So this is the Convergence Accelerator. So let me go to the next slide. We also have the regional innovation engines, where what we are trying to do here is try to take some investments of all the different federal agencies, NSF, and state and local governments and other industry in the region, and help them to work hand in glove in synergy with each other. What we notice right now, if you go to the next slide, is that there are many regions in the country that don't have the wherewithal or the clout of Austin or Pittsburgh. Instead, what they do is they have all these different pieces that don't really talk to each other. They don't really work with each other. Sometimes they're not even aware of the existence of each other. And we want to change that by encouraging them to come together, have a coordinated regional development strategy that talks about how to scale and sustain economic growth that's built on use-inspired R&D, right? So we are also asking for inclusive engagement. So we are asking our stakeholders to be brought into this program early on. We don't want somebody to add a HBCU because they want diversity, but rather look at the strengths that they can bring and incorporate them and HSIs and other MSIs as viable partners and consult with them from the get-go, right? And provide them the appropriate set of resources that they need to succeed, and in turn, feed the primary partners who may be looking at other tasks as well. But we want all of this to happen in an equal, or what I call a roundtable approach, right? We want them all to be knights of the round table. We don't want somebody to be a senior and a junior partner. So we are trying to explain this as a priority of the program. So in that sense, we're trying to be intentionally different. We're going to be investing in a region over a 10-year period. It's a $160 million award. It's a big investment for NSF. And again, there are a lot of expectations for this program. I encourage you all to participate in this. We have published, can you go to the next slide? We have published a list of concept outlines that we have received. And if you are already not part of a team, or if you don't know if your institution is part of a team, I encourage you to explore that list and find a way to join a team, which we are going to be receiving proposals over the next 3-4 months. Type 1 proposals are due now, and type 2 proposals, which are the big awards, are due in January. Okay, so the last one is like the technology translation piece. This is building on a rich set of programs that NSF already had, the ICOR program, the Partnership for Innovation program, and the Small Business Innovation Research program. And we are trying to create new innovative pathways for what we think of as the lab to market space. Next slide. And this slide in some sense captures the theme. I mean, each of these programs merit like hour-long discussion of the values and the benefits of partnering. What I want to say is, we call this the entire bench to benefit space, and we encourage every one of you to be aware of these programs, what they can do for you. You may not want to do it now. The timing may not be right, but we encourage you to share this knowledge with your students, with your faculty, peer faculty members, the university administrators, and so on. So you have, when you decide to make a go for it, you know how to tap into these programs. That's very, very important, right? We want you to be able to train your students not just to become excellent academics, but we also want them to become excellent practitioners, right? If they choose to go that path. We want you to have that facilities and resources to help you do that. And that's what NSF is here to do. That's what TIP wants to do. And as you can see, there are many TBDs in there, like many programs that we think are needed to fill this entire gap, because it's not all about, technology translation is not about making money or starting a new company, right? Or becoming the next Google. It's about creating impact. And we believe there are many, many ways to create impact, including public policy and educating our workforce and so on. We are looking to solve that entire space of how do we go about doing that effectively. If you have ideas, we welcome your suggestions and thoughts on that. Next slide. So I'll leave you with this slide, right? If you will see this slide often, and people have probably seen this, variations of these, where public funds are heavily concentrated in what we think of as foundational research, and some use to inspire research, but then we really don't go down the path to implementation and scaling things up and so on. And private funds, the private investments actually go more into short-term wins. They don't want to invest in the prototypes and early stage investments because they just don't see immediate bang for the buck. And as a result, this valley of death exists in translating great ideas from the lab to the marketplace, right? The lab on the left to the marketplace on the right. And the takeaway message that we all want you to have, right? Our message from NSF is TIP exists. Can you advance this? TIP exists to bridge this valley of death and instead of a valley of death, we don't want you to fear that. We want you to see there is a ramp of opportunity if you come to TIP, where you know how to seamlessly and with minimal effort, without fearing failure a lot, you can go from the left to the right and achieve great satisfaction and purpose in what you do in research. So that's our job, and we are here to help, and we are looking for your feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thiago. Man, you and Barbara were really the perfect 1-2 punch. We learned the vocabulary and then we heard what the concepts were. So that's really terrific. Thank you so much. And I think I saw that the new AD of the TIP program is going to be holding a town hall in the near future, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Indeed. So we have one on the 27th, and we'll have more, right? And all of our contact information is here on the slide. So Erwin and Gracie are the AD and his assistant. I and Barry Johnson are the division directors. You are welcome to reach out to us at any given time, ask us, questions. And we are looking for people, qualified people who are interested in hiring. We are looking for to hire. So let us know if you're interested, right?
Well, we have one question. Is there an advisory committee for TIP? So you might have a volunteer.
Okay. Please reach out. We are in the process of forming one. If you have suggestions for excellent candidates who, including yourself, if you are willing to offer, please reach out to us.
Okay, very good. Rita, we only have about 5 minutes left. Can you give us a quick update on the Coastlines and People program?
Okay, I can try. I'll very much abbreviate what I was going to talk about. So next slide, please. So it's a kind of a good segue from what Barbara was talking about, is that this is really a very use-inspired program where we're really trying to get folks to look at fundamental research on coastal environmental hazards, but in a society relevant questions, and really to integrate stakeholders and local communities into the co-production of both the questions and the solutions for the coastal community. So really also providing a framework where other institutions and constituencies can learn how to work together on relevant scientific questions. Next slide, please. And so what really sets us apart is, as Bob said, we are the National Science Foundation, so it really needs to advance the understanding of the coastal hazards, but really trying to have it intersections of the process, the hazards, the people who are really critical to this, and with a focus on both broadening participation, inclusive diversity, and stakeholder engagement from multiple sectors of the institutions that we often don't think about, economics, private industry, as well as stakeholders and policymakers. So we're really calling this a community-engaged research, which is probably another step on this use-inspired research paradigm. Next slide. And so just to give you a history, and a lot of you might have been involved with this, we started this a long time ago in 2018, really doing scoping workshops with the community, kind of similar to what Diego's saying about the CXL, asking for what would you do in this space if we could. So in 2020, I wrote this synthesis report for NSF on all the scoping workshops and what themes came out of it. And then the solicitation, the first solicitation was released. And just next slide. What we tried to do is the scale is large so that there were $20 million awards over 5 years. And there were also 5-year focused awards up to 5 years, 5 million focused awards. And so just to give you a flavor of what we funded so far, next slide. The first solicitation, really we're looking at both trying to be regionally diverse as well as topically diverse. The first was really focused in the Northeast on mega cities and what their issues are with sea level rise, et cetera. And then on the other extreme, looking at the coastal hazards in Cascadia, which is earthquakes, tsunamis, and landslides. And then the third one on the next slide really focused on indigenous communities all throughout different parts of the country, looking at what are their hazards, how are they going to respond, how do we work with tribal communities on these questions, and really implementing solutions that work for all sectors. We also funded, next slide, to look at the more diversity of regions, a hub in Alaska, one study in the Gulf, one really focusing on the flip side of the Northeast, really looking at rural communities and not just the big urban centers, but understanding that rural communities also have issues, especially the climate migration from urban areas into rural and how they're going to deal with it on these less resourced communities. And then the last one was really looking at environmental justice, which is really a theme throughout all the COPE programs. We really want folks to think about what are environmentally just solutions that we can come up with, not just implementable ones, but ones that take into account equity. And so the next slide. So when I joined, I was just to give you an idea, it seems like only a few number of awards, only having 7 out of the cohort last year. But if you look at this, the partnerships are so extensive that the funding went to more than half of the states and territories in the US. Next slide. I'll skip over this one. We funded over 170 individuals. Next slide. And a broad diversity of disciplines. So lastly, the current solicitation, we just held and announced the awards in last week. And I should say that this is across NSF program. We have a working group of over 16 program officers from all different parts of the from the foundation, and we made 5 more awards. Next slide. Just looking at trying to augment what we were already funding. We have one that's focused in the Gulf, another large scale that's focused really looking at coastal Caribbean and reef line coasts across the different parts of the country. Next slide. And then 3 more of the focused hubs. And again, there were really one in the Great Lakes, which is coastal, and then one focused on heat waves in the South California, which is actually very relevant right now, as well as another one that's looking at equity again in urban communities with a focus on co-production of knowledge and solutions. So the big question everyone's asking is, next slide, is what are we going to do next? And so one of the things we're working on this year is really trying to make a complete network like the LTR system has done across all these hubs so that they can learn from each other, learn best practices, disseminate best practices, especially for co-production and stakeholder engagement, because if you do stakeholder engagement wrong, obviously that alienates your whole community. We also want to add new partners. So I'm looking at mechanisms for how can we add folks that maybe were not part of the hub at first, especially maybe some other agency partners, as well as institutions that we can add to the existing networks, and then come out with these promising best practices in co-design, convergence, et cetera. And it's only been a couple of years, but we're already kind of figuring out what are the outcomes that are coming out of this and how do we evaluate success. So we are looking at some metrics from what we did before. We're not sure of what our FY23 budget is going to be. So what scale we will be able to do any further work in this area. So stay tuned. We're going to be updating the website by hopefully the end of September to alert the community if what we're going to be doing next in terms of any funding opportunities. So that was a 2-second minute version. Thank you.
Thank you. Almost right on time. Okay, just a couple of things. So for those of you, more than 150 of you that registered, you will receive a link to the presentation this afternoon. I urge you, we didn't get to most of the questions. I urge you to just write directly to the program officers. They will answer your questions via email, and so please follow up with them. And then finally, on behalf of AERC and AIBS, thank you. This was a really great session. We know how much time it takes, and we just can't tell you how much we appreciate your time. Thanks. Yatsna, you want to end with anything?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody, and watch out for that follow-up email with the webinar recording, and I'm happy to share the slides that were shared today as well.
Thank you guys so much.
Thanks. Bye.